The wind howled through the frozen valley, its voice a mournful song of winter's cruelty. Thick snow blanketed the ground, burying old stones and forgotten paths under a pristine white shroud. The stars above flickered coldly, indifferent to the struggles below. Nestled between two jagged peaks, a small cabin stood alone, its chimney releasing a thin, wavering trail of smoke into the night sky. Inside, the warmth of a crackling fire held the bitter cold at bay, casting flickering shadows on rough wooden walls lined with old tools and worn-out books. Nathan Cole pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he stirred the stew simmering in a cast-iron pot. The rich scent of meat and spices filled the cabin, a rare luxury in the depths of winter. He sighed, glancing at the single chair and table in the center of the room. A solitary man in an unforgiving world. The war had ended years ago, but its ghost still haunted him. The Galactic Accord had finally driven the Drethkin Empire into retreat, forcing the once mighty dragons of the stars into exile. Nathan had fought on the front lines, a pilot and engineer, patching up ships and taking down enemy fighters. Now he lived here, far from the shattered remains of that war, content with the quiet, until tonight. A sound, barely audible over the wind's roar, caught his attention. It was a low, guttural groan, followed by the crunch of something heavy shifting in the snow. He frowned, setting down his ladle and reaching for his rifle. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Then movement. A large, hunched form struggled through the drifts, each step slow, labored. Nathan hesitated only for a moment before throwing on his boots and stepping outside. The cold bit through his coat instantly, but he pressed forward. As he neared, the shape resolved into something both familiar and impossible. A dragon. Not a towering, fire-breathing beast of legend, but something old, broken. Its scales, once the color of midnight, were dulled and chipped, revealing old scars and fresh wounds. Large wings hung uselessly at its sides, tattered like battle-worn banners. One of its massive forelegs buckled, sending it crashing into the snow with a pained snarl. Nathan tightened his grip on his rifle, instincts honed from war screaming at him to be cautious. Yet, as he met the creature's eyes, slitted, deep, and filled with something he couldn't quite place, his grip loosened. It wasn't malice he saw there. It was exhaustion, and perhaps desperation. The dragon exhaled a slow, ragged breath, sending a weak plume of mist into the night air. Human, the voice was barely more than a whisper, rasping and hollow. Nathan took a step closer. "You're hurt." The dragon let out a dry, humorless chuckle, sharp as ever. That voice, it triggered a memory buried deep beneath years of solitude. A battlefield littered with metal and blood. A fight between enemies who had no choice but to battle. In a moment when the fighting had stopped, if only for a heartbeat. "I know you," Nathan murmured. "Razan," the dragon said. "Once, I had a name feared across the stars. Now, I'm little more than a dying ember." Nathan hesitated. He should walk away. Let nature take its course. This creature had been an enemy, once. But war had a way of making enemies out of people who might have shared a drink under different stars. And now, here it was, not as a conqueror, but as a relic. "Come inside," Nathan said at last. Razan lifted his head, surprised. "Why?" Nathan shrugged. "Because it's cold, and because I have stew." A long silence stretched between them before, with a shuddering breath, Razan forced himself to move. Nathan stepped forward, lending what little support he could as the dragon dragged itself toward the cabin. The night carried on, but something had shifted in the silence. Something old, something broken, something waiting to be mended. And in the morning, something unimaginable would happen. Nathan woke to the sound of heavy breathing and the unmistakable scent of firewood burning low in the hearth. The morning light barely filtered through the thick storm clouds overhead, casting the small cabin in a dim, golden hue. Razan lay curled near the fireplace, his massive body stretched across the floor. But something was different. His once tattered scales gleamed with a renewed vibrance, their deep crimson hue richer than the night before. The scars that had marred his body seemed fainter, as if the passage of a single night had begun erasing centuries of suffering. Nathan sat up slowly, his muscles stiff from sleeping in the old wooden chair. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if it was some trick of the light, but as he watched, he saw something even more impossible. Razan's breathing had changed. It was deeper, steadier, filled with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The dragon stirred. A low rumble echoed through the cabin as Razan slowly unfurled his wings, stretching them out. The tattered edges of his membranes had begun to mend. His golden eyes snapped open, pupils narrowing as they fixed on Nathan. "You did something," Razan rumbled, his voice still thick with sleep, but carrying a newfound clarity. Nathan raised his hands defensively. "I didn't do anything, big guy. You just slept. Maybe you needed the rest." Razan frowned, or at least the dragon's equivalent of a frown. "No, this is impossible." He turned one of his claws over, flexing his talons. "I can feel my strength returning. My fire, it's coming back." Nathan exhaled. "Well, that's a good thing, right?" The dragon's gaze darkened. "You don't understand. I was dying, human. My kind do not recover like this. Not overnight, not without magic, and certainly not in exile." Nathan frowned, glancing at the dragon's wings again. He had seen creatures mend before, but nothing this fast. He scratched his chin, deep in thought. "Look, I don't know how dragon biology works, but maybe your body just needed some time away from whatever happened to you before." Razan shook his head. "No, something changed." He stared at Nathan with an unsettling intensity, as if searching for an answer within him. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Nathan insisted. "I gave you a place to rest, a fire to sleep by." "That's it." Razan considered this, his golden eyes flickering in the firelight. He opened his mouth, then froze. His pupils dilated, his body tensed. "We're not alone." Nathan's stomach dropped. "What?" The dragon's nostrils flared. "I smell them. Outside. Something is watching." Nathan's instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed his rifle from the corner of the cabin and crept toward the door, careful not to make a sound. He cracked it open just enough to peer out into the morning mist. The forest was eerily still. Snow blanketed the ground in a pristine sheet, undisturbed except for the faintest depressions leading up to the edge of the tree line. Something had been here, recently. Then he saw it, a dark figure, barely visible through the fog, standing between the trees. It wasn't alone. More shapes lurked just beyond sight, their outlines shifting against the mist. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. "We've got company." Razan rose to his full height, his wings spreading slightly as his gaze locked onto the unseen intruders. "They've come for me." "Who?" The dragon's voice was low, filled with a quiet fury. "The Black Talon." Nathan had heard whispers of them before. A rogue faction of dragons that had forsaken honor, working as mercenaries, assassins, and warlords. They were known for hunting their own kind, bringing death wherever they went. Nathan glanced back at Razan. "Can you fight?" Razan flexed his claws. "If what you say is true, if I have truly begun to heal, then yes." Nathan nodded. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The first arrow struck the doorframe, followed by the low growl of a waiting predator. The battle was about to begin. Nathan woke to the sound of heavy breathing and the unmistakable scent of firewood burning low in the hearth. The morning light barely filtered through the thick storm clouds overhead, casting the small cabin in a dim, golden hue. Razan lay curled near the fireplace, his massive body stretched across the floor. But something was different. His once tattered scales gleamed with a renewed vibrance, their deep crimson hue richer than the night before. The scars that had marred his body seemed fainter, as if the passage of a single night had begun erasing centuries of suffering. Nathan sat up slowly, his muscles stiff from sleeping in the old wooden chair. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if it was some trick of the light, but as he watched, he saw something even more impossible. Razan's breathing had changed. It was deeper, steadier, filled with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The dragon stirred. A low rumble echoed through the cabin as Razan slowly unfurled his wings, stretching them out. The tattered edges of his membranes had begun to mend. His golden eyes snapped open, pupils narrowing as they fixed on Nathan. "You did something," Razan rumbled, his voice still thick with sleep, but carrying a newfound clarity. Nathan raised his hands defensively. "I didn't do anything, big guy. You just slept. Maybe you needed the rest." Razan frowned, or at least the dragon's equivalent of a frown. "No, this is impossible." He turned one of his claws over, flexing his talons. "I can feel my strength returning. My fire, it's coming back." Nathan exhaled. "Well, that's a good thing, right?" The dragon's gaze darkened. "You don't understand. I was dying, human. My kind do not recover like this. Not overnight, not without magic, and certainly not in exile." Nathan frowned, glancing at the dragon's wings again. He had seen creatures mend before, but nothing this fast. He scratched his chin, deep in thought. "Look, I don't know how dragon biology works, but maybe your body just needed some time away from whatever happened to you before." Razan shook his head. "No, something changed." He stared at Nathan with an unsettling intensity, as if searching for an answer within him. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Nathan insisted. "I gave you a place to rest, a fire to sleep by. That's it." Razan considered this, his golden eyes flickering in the firelight. He opened his mouth, then froze. His pupils dilated, his body tensed. "We're not alone." Nathan's stomach dropped. "What?" The dragon's nostrils flared. "I smell them. Outside. Something is watching." Nathan's instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed his rifle from the corner of the cabin and crept toward the door, careful not to make a sound. He cracked it open just enough to peer out into the morning mist. The forest was eerily still. Snow blanketed the ground in a pristine sheet, undisturbed except for the faintest depressions leading up to the edge of the tree line. Something had been here, recently. Then he saw it, a dark figure, barely visible through the fog, standing between the trees. It wasn't alone. More shapes lurked just beyond sight, their outlines shifting against the mist. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. "We've got company." Razan rose to his full height, his wings spreading slightly as his gaze locked onto the unseen intruders. "They've come for me." "Who?" The dragon's voice was low, filled with a quiet fury. "The Black Talon." Nathan had heard whispers of them before. A rogue faction of dragons that had forsaken honor, working as mercenaries, assassins, and warlords. They were known for hunting their own kind, bringing death wherever they went. Nathan glanced back at Razan. "Can you fight?" Razan flexed his claws. "If what you say is true, if I have truly begun to heal, then yes." Nathan nodded. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The first arrow struck the doorframe, followed by the low growl of a waiting predator. The battle was about to begin. The storm rolled in by nightfall. Nathan barely had time to reinforce the cabin's defenses before the wind howled through the trees, rattling the wooden structure like a dying beast. Snow lashed against the windows, thick and blinding, drowning the world in white. The fireplace cast flickering shadows across the walls, but its warmth felt frail against the rising tension in the air. Razan sat near the hearth, his golden eyes unreadable. His scales, once dull and cracked, now gleamed like polished obsidian, and the strength in his limbs had fully returned. More than returned. He was faster, stronger. His fire burned hotter than it should have. Nathan noticed. "You're different," he muttered, cleaning his rifle. The dragon exhaled sharply. "I know." Nathan glanced up. "You gonna tell me why?" Razan hesitated. Then, with a low rumble, he said, "The Black Talons were right. You awakened something in me, human. Something ancient. Something that should not have been possible." Nathan frowned. "I don't buy that. I patched you up, gave you shelter. That doesn't explain why you're suddenly acting like you've been plugged into a damn fusion core." The dragon's tail flicked. "It is not your actions alone, but who you are." Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. "And what the hell does that mean?" Razan was about to answer when a deep boom shook the ground. Both of them snapped to attention. The sound hadn't come from the storm. It had come from above. Nathan grabbed his gear and threw open the door. Despite the blizzard, his eyes widened at what he saw. A massive warship hung in the sky. Dark metal, jagged edges, and glowing red insignias marked it as Black Talon technology. The ship was too large to land, but that wasn't its purpose. It was a carrier, and it had already begun its deployment. Shadowy figures dropped from the ship's underbelly, dozens, maybe more, swooping down through the storm with terrifying speed. Each was clad in battle armor, their wings lined with razor-sharp plating. A full hunting party. Nathan swore under his breath. They're not playing around this time. Razan's expression darkened. They want me dead. And now you as well. Nathan chambered around. Then let's give him hell. The first wave struck the cabin like a tidal wave. One Black Talon warrior crashed through the sidewall, sending splinters flying. Nathan rolled out of the way, just as a blade sliced through the space where he had been standing. He fired on instinct, 3 shots center mass. The bullets slammed into the warrior's chest, staggering him, but not dropping him. Then Razan struck. The dragon lunged, his claws shearing through armor like it was paper. With one powerful bite, he crushed the attacker's throat, then spun, using his tail to send another enemy flying through the wreckage. Nathan ducked as another Talon swooped low, his curved sword flashing in the firelight. Nathan barely managed to parry with his rifle, the blade scraping against steel. He kicked out, sending the warrior stumbling backward, and fired point-blank into his face. The battle raged. The storm made it nearly impossible to see, but the black talons moved like ghosts, appearing and vanishing between the snowdrifts. For every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. Razan fought like a beast reborn. Flames roared from his throat, carving paths of destruction through the blizzard. His claws tore through armored flesh. His tail crushed bone and shattered weapons. But still, the enemy kept coming. Nathan was running low on ammo. He switched to his knife, grappling with one of the warriors as they rolled through the snow. The Black Talon had the advantage in size and strength, but Nathan was faster. He drove the blade under the creature's jaw, twisted, and felt the shudder of death as the body collapsed. But then, a piercing screech split the night. Nathan barely had time to react before something massive crashed into him, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, skidding through the snow. His vision blurred as he looked up at the new arrival. A Black Talon warlord. This one was different, taller, broader, clad in dark steel with glowing crimson patterns carved into his flesh. His eyes burned with something beyond mere rage. Hate. He unsheathed a massive blade, its edge humming with energy. Razan, he growled, his voice like thunder. You should have stayed dead. Razan's body tensed. His wings flared wide, his fire crackling in his throat. Vorik. Nathan wiped blood from his mouth. Friend of yours? Razan's expression hardened. The one who betrayed me. Vorik smiled, a cold, merciless thing. And now, I will finish what I started. He charged. Razan met him head-on. The impact shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the snow. Vorik's blade slashed through the air, forcing Razan back. But the old dragon was faster now, stronger. He dodged the next strike and countered with a burst of fire. Vorik didn't flinch. He cut through the flames. Nathan watched in horror as the warlord's sword absorbed the fire, twisting it, redirecting it, before hurling it back. The blast struck Razan square in the chest. He roared in pain, crashing into the snow. Nathan didn't think. He raised his rifle and fired at Vorik's head. The bullet stopped inches from the warlord's face. Vorik turned, eyes gleaming. Pathetic. Before Nathan could move, Vorik vanished and reappeared right in front of him. A backhand strike sent Nathan flying. Pain exploded in his ribs as he crashed into the wreckage of the cabin. His vision dimmed. He could hear Razan struggling to stand, growling in fury. Vorik loomed over Nathan, his blade raised high. You do not understand what you have done, human, he said, voice dripping with contempt. By saving him, you have doomed yourself. The blade swung down and was caught. Razan's claws clamped around the weapon, stopping at inches from Nathan's throat. Vorik's eyes widened in shock. Impossible, Razan roared. The flames that erupted from his body were unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. White-hot, blinding raw power. The sheer force sent Vorik staggering back, his armor beginning to crack under the heat. Razan stood tall, his golden eyes now glowing brighter than ever. "This ends now," he growled, and with a single, earth-shattering blast, he unleashed his full fury. The storm howled, but it was nothing compared to the fury unleashed between the two dragons. Razan stood in the wreckage of the cabin, fire curling from his maw, his golden eyes alight with an unearthly glow. The ground beneath him hissed and cracked as the snow melted away in wide, steaming circles. Power surged through him, power that should not have been possible. Vorik staggered back, his black armor scorched, his crimson blade cracked along its length. He let out a low, guttural snarl, his wings twitching as he tried to steady himself. This is not possible," Vorik growled. His voice carried something new now. Not just rage. Fear. Nathan, barely holding himself up against the shattered remains of the cabin, wiped blood from his lips. His ribs ached, his vision swam, but he saw it clearly. The tables had turned. Razan took a step forward, claws curling. "You always feared me, Vorik. That's why you betrayed me. Why you kill my kin." Vorik bared his fangs. "I did what was necessary. You were weak." "No," Razan snarled. "You feared what I could become, what I was meant to be." The wind howled through the battlefield. The Black Talon warriors who had once swarmed the area hesitated now, watching their warlord falter. Doubt crept into their ranks. Nathan saw the shift. They weren't sure anymore. But Vorik wasn't finished. With a snarl, he lifted his blade and plunged it into his own chest. Nathan's eyes widened. What the hell? Dark energy crackled across Vorik's body, and the wound he inflicted on himself twisted. His black blood pulsed with unnatural energy, his veins glowing red-hot as his form grew. His wings spread wider, his claws lengthened, his scales darkened until they looked like solid obsidian. Razan's body tensed. Nathan's stomach dropped. "That's not good." Vorik grinned, his voice now layered with something deeper, more sinister. "You are not the only one with hidden potential, Razan." Then he moved. Faster than before, he slammed into Razan, sending the smaller dragon crashing through the trees. Razan roared as Vorik's claws raked against his scales, the dark energy searing into his flesh. Nathan gritted his teeth. They were evenly matched again, but there had to be a way to tip the scales. His mind raced. Vorik had always been stronger than Razan, until now. Razan's awakening had changed that, but Vorik had adapted. If Vorik was using some kind of dark energy to enhance himself, then maybe it wasn't invincible. Nathan's gaze flicked to Vorik's blade. It had cracked. That meant the energy inside it wasn't limitless. It could be broken. Nathan reached for his rifle, ignoring the pain screaming through his body. He steadied his breath. One shot. Vorik raised his claws to finish Razan. Nathan pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the weakened section of Vorik's sword. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the blade exploded. Dark energy ripped outward, the force knocking Vorik backward as shards of his own weapon embedded into his chest. He let out a strangled roar, clutching his wound as his darkened form began to fracture. Razan didn't hesitate. He launched forward, grasping Vorik by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Fire burned at the edges of his maw, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just fire. This was judgment. "You wanted to see what I could become, Vorik?" Razan growled. His eyes blazed as energy crackled through his body. "Then witness it." He unleashed his full fury. The blast of white-hot flame engulfed Vorik completely. The warlord let out one last, agonized scream before his form was obliterated. It was over. The Black Talon warriors who had once fought so ferociously now hesitated, staring in horror at the place where their warlord had stood. One by one, they began to flee into the storm, their resolve shattered. Nathan exhaled, his rifle slipping from his hands as he collapsed onto the snow. His entire body ached, but he managed a small, breathless laugh. Holy hell, we actually did it. Razan stepped forward, his body still glowing faintly, though the energy around him was beginning to settle. He stared at the empty space where Vorik had been, then slowly turned to face Nathan. You saved me, the dragon said, his voice quieter now. Nathan smirked. Yeah, well, you saved me first. Razan huffed, his golden eyes softening. Perhaps we saved each other. Nathan chuckled. Yeah, something like that. But deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't the end. The power that had awakened in Razan, the energy Vorik had used, wasn't normal. And somewhere out there, someone else would take notice. The storm had passed. The once raging blizzard had faded into silence, leaving only smoldering wreckage and blood-stained snow in its wake. Vorik was gone, his dark power extinguished, and the Black Talon warriors had fled into the frozen wastelands. Nathan lay on his back, staring up at the sky. The stars were finally visible again, peeking through the clouds like distant, watching eyes. He took a slow breath, feeling the ache in his ribs, the exhaustion pressing down on him. But they had won. Razan stood nearby, his golden eyes scanning the battlefield. His scales still shimmered faintly with residual energy, but the power that had erupted from him earlier was already fading. He flexed his claws, as if testing his own strength, then turned toward Nathan. You should rest, Razan said. You fought well. Nathan let out a dry chuckle. Pretty sure I got my ass kicked. The dragon gave a small, amused huff. And yet you still stand. Nathan propped himself up on his elbows, glancing at the scorched ground where Vorik had been. The warlord's dark energy had vanished completely, leaving nothing behind but a faint, lingering tension in the air. And yet, something didn't feel right. Razan seemed to sense it too. His wings shifted uncomfortably, his tail twitching against the ground. Vorik's power, it was unnatural. That was no mere strength of the flesh. Something else fueled him. Nathan frowned, and he wasn't the only one. You changed too. The dragon's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, but unlike him, I do not know the source of my awakening. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Whatever it was, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was buried in you. Waiting. Razan was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he turned, his expression unreadable. We need answers. Nathan followed his gaze. The wreckage of Vorik's forces was scattered across the tundra, but among the ruins, something glowed faintly beneath the snow. Nathan forced himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his side. He limped forward with Razan at his side, brushing away the snow until his fingers touched cold metal. A small, intricately carved stone tablet. But as soon as his hand made contact, a pulse of energy shot through his body. Nathan gasped, his vision flickering. Suddenly, he wasn't in the tundra anymore. He saw planets burning, massive dragon-like beings clashing in the void of space, their scales shimmering like dying stars. Empires crumbling. A war that had been fought before time itself was recorded. And at the heart of it all, a single, looming presence. Watching, waiting, the nameless one. Nathan's breath caught. He felt something staring back at him. Then, the vision shattered. Nathan fell backward, gasping. The stone tablet pulsed one last time before cracking down the middle, and then crumbling into dust. Razan was staring at him. What did you see? Nathan swallowed hard. His heart was pounding, his hands shaking. Something big, he muttered. Something really, really big. The dragon's expression darkened. I felt it too. Nathan exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had seen Vorik's power before, but now he understood. That was only a fragment, a shadow of something far greater. And Razan had the same energy. Not for Vorik, not from the Black Talons, from whatever came before. Nathan took a deep breath. We need to get out of here. Razan nodded. Agreed. The two of them turned toward the horizon. The tundra stretched endlessly before them, but for the first time, Nathan didn't see it as just a wasteland. It was the beginning of something bigger, a war forgotten by time, a power that should have never been awakened. And at the heart of it, a human and a dragon. Nathan glanced at Razan and smirked. Guess we're in this together, huh? The dragon chuckled. It would appear so. As they stepped forward, the snow crunched beneath their feet. The stars above them burned bright. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the universe, something stirred. Final line. Long after the war ended, long after the dust settled, alien historians searched for the truth. But the records were incomplete, the names lost. All that remained were whispers among the stars, of a species that never surrendered, never knelt, never stopped.